Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a story that is, honestly, one of the most wild business tragedies in modern history. We're talking about the incredible rise and the shockingly fast collapse of the Nokia empire. I mean, if you've ever wondered how an absolute giant goes from owning the market to just seemingly vanishing overnight, you are absolutely in the right place. Let's get right into it and unpack how this unprecedented collapse unfolded.
Seriously, how did the world's most powerful phone company lose everything? It's kind of hard to wrap your head around today, but there was a time when Nokia was the gold standard. They weren't just trusted by everyday consumers. Massive corporate enterprises and entire countries relied on them. To buy a mobile phone simply meant to buy a Nokia. The brand felt permanent, untouchable. So how does a company with all the cash, all the talent, and millions of loyal customers in the world suddenly just lose its grip on the smartphone industry?
Well, part one, the undisputed mobile king. Okay, let's dive into this.
Before we look at their fall, we really have to look at their rise. Now, Nokia didn't actually start as a tech company. Founded in Finland way back in 1865, they spent a century operating in industries like paper products and rubber. But jump ahead to the 1980s and 90s, and they made this brilliant, aggressive pivot into telecommunications. And by the early 2000s, that pivot resulted in a staggering 40% global market share. Think about that for just a moment. Almost 1 out of every 2 mobile phones sold on planet Earth carried the Nokia name. They were generating billions in revenue, and their competitors were essentially just scrambling to keep up with whatever Nokia decided to do next.
And their dominance was built on some truly legendary devices. Take the Nokia 3310. It had this almost mythical durability. People joked it was literally unbreakable, and a battery that lasted for days, surviving drops and rough use without a scratch. Then you had the Nokia 1100. Simple, highly affordable, and wildly reliable. Actually, scratch that. It wasn't just reliable. It became one of the best-selling consumer electronics products of all time. These specific, tangible products built an unstoppable reputation. Nokia was king of the hill, and man, they felt invincible.
Which brings us to part 2. The touchscreen revolution arrives.
So while Nokia is busy celebrating its massive success, a huge threat is quietly creeping up. We've reached the inciting incident of our story. The month is January, the year is 2007, and Steve Jobs just walked onto a stage to introduce the iPhone. The reaction from Nokia? Well, they were frankly dismissive. Their executives literally went on record saying they believed the iPhone would remain a niche product. And to be fair, industry experts were kind of skeptical too. The iPhone was expensive, Apple had never made a mobile phone before, and crucially, it didn't have a physical keyboard. Nokia looked at it and basically thought, yeah, no way this is a threat. But talk about dramatic irony, right? They were so wrong. Because consumers absolutely loved the new touchscreen experience.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact paradigm shift that Nokia completely missed. Think of it like a giant shift in the rules of the game. Look at the hardware and durability aspect. That was Nokia's whole focus. It's what won them the 90s and the early 2000s. But then look at software, touch, and apps. This was the brand new battleground. The iPhone wasn't just a new phone, it was a completely new way of interacting with technology, where the touchscreen was the center of the experience.
Let's look at part 3. Mistake, ignoring software shifts.
This brings us directly to their first fatal strategic flaw. Nokia just kept pouring their vast resources into improving traditional hardware, completely underestimating the software shift. They just didn't see that software was about to eat the hardware world. The anchor dragging them down was their operating system, Symbian. Sure, it helped dominate the past, but compared to the incredibly smooth, intuitive interfaces of the iPhone, Symbian felt completely outdated, clunky, and difficult to use. And to make matters worse, Google had just launched Android as a free, open operating system. Competitors like Samsung aggressively jumped on board, developers flocked to these new platforms, and Symbian was ultimately just abandoned as a relic.
Moving on to part 4, mistake, the bureaucratic paralysis.
Now, you might be wondering, couldn't a smart company just pivot? Usually yes, but that requires agility. Inside Nokia, decision-making had become an absolute nightmare. They had brilliant engineers for sure, but those engineers were trapped in a system where teams fundamentally disagreed on strategy, and every single new project had to wade through endless, complex layers of management. As a result, their internal innovation practically ground to a halt. The great tragedy here is that at the exact moment Nokia needed to move faster than ever before, they actually slowed down.
Which leads into part 5, the failed Windows transition. Realizing their position was weakening rapidly, Nokia knew they needed a drastic solution. In 2011, they made a massive, desperate, and pretty bold strategic decision. Instead of joining the thriving Android ecosystem like Samsung did, Nokia partnered with Microsoft. They adopted Windows Phone as their primary smartphone platform, hoping to build a third major ecosystem alongside Apple and Android. And for a fleeting moment, there was a glimmer of hope. They launched the Lumia line of smartphones. The hardware, totally true to Nokia's legacy, was fantastic. They received high praise for their physical design and brilliant cameras. But they immediately hit a fatal software roadblock.
So the crucial point is that Windows Phone lacked the one thing consumers now demanded above all else: apps. People wanted the applications they could easily get on an iPhone or an Android. Because Windows Phone didn't have those apps, users didn't buy the Lumia phones. And because there were no users, developers refused to spend time building apps for the platform. This created a vicious, self-feeding cycle of decline. Fewer users attracted fewer developers, which meant fewer apps, which attracted even fewer users. The gap just continued to widen, and Windows Phone never achieved momentum.
And finally, part 6, the cost of standing still.
The compounding effects of these strategic mistakes, ignoring the software shift, internal paralysis, and betting on a doomed app ecosystem resulted in absolute devastation for Nokia's market share. Year after year, sales collapsed. When we map it out, the speed of this collapse is honestly terrifying. In 2007, Apple launches the iPhone and Nokia dismisses it. Just 4 short years later, in 2011, Nokia is forced into a desperate pivot to Microsoft. And merely 2 years after that, in 2013, the unthinkable happens. Nokia officially agrees to sell its entire mobile phone business to Microsoft. In just a shockingly brief 6-year window, the undisputed king of the industry effectively surrendered and lost the smartphone war.
Now, to be clear, Nokia, the company, did not simply evaporate into thin air. They shifted their focus back toward their roots in a way, pivoting heavily into telecommunications infrastructure and network technology, industries where they remain very active today. But their absolute dominance in mobile phones, that exists purely as a memory now, and it's a memory that proves that in business, massive success often breeds fatal complacency.
Nokia had it all, right? A powerful brand, massive resources, loyal customers, and brilliant engineers. But they lacked the ability to adapt fast enough when the world completely changed around them. So whether you're looking at your own career, a project, or a business, I want to leave you with this powerful question derived right from this explainer. Are you protecting the past, or are you building the future? Because as we've just seen, in technology and in life, standing still is almost always the fastest way to fall behind. Thanks for joining me to explore the source material on this incredible story. See you next time.